Welcome to Boston Children's Answers Parentcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Arnold. As a doctor and a mom, I'm passionate about helping kids stay happy and healthy. So join me as I chat with other Boston children's experts to find answers for you and your family. Hey there, and welcome back. Today we're talking about performing arts athletes. What do I mean by that? Cheerleaders, figure skaters, dancers. Many of you may not even think of them as athletes, but they definitely are. As we get started, let's kick it off with our parent question.
Hi, I'm Teresa. My son plays football and my daughter dances. They both work really hard, but their dad refuses to call my daughter an athlete like her brother. How can I get him to see her as the athlete she is?
Thank you so much for that question, Teresa. Now you're going to have your husband listen to this episode because I know we can change his mind. Here to talk to us today about this unique type of athlete is Dr. Ellen Geminiani. She's a sports medicine physician here at Boston Children's and also a Team USA physician at US Figure Skating. Thank you, Dr. Geminiani, for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm very excited about this topic because I was a participant in a few of these types of unique athletic sports. And so I wanted to start off with asking you, how do you define what a performing athlete is?
Well, a performing arts athlete, their focus is on obviously presenting themselves either through physical movement as a dancer or voice or circus arts. And many people consider that more an art form. And actually for many years, it was only considered an art form. But in recent 10, 20 years, people have been more referring to them more as artistic athletes because the physical demand is so great and the training that's required, the length of time required to master skills is really equivalent, if not more, than many athletes that just play high school sports.
That's incredible. And I think, the term just makes sense, right? It's a great way to think about this as there's an art to it and a huge athletic part to it that not many people, like you said previously, were really thinking of. What would be the types of athletics or artistic athletics that are in this group? In this group,
we see all kinds of athletes, but the most commonly referred to are the dancers, and that's all forms of dance, from classical ballet to contemporary modern styles, even break dancing, Irish step dancing, and all the disciplines of jazz, tap, even cultural dance requires a great deal of physical activity and training, so it's pretty broad. We have
My
musicians.
daughter does Bollywood dancing.
Terrific, yeah, and it's terrific exercise and can be a lifelong activity, which I think is great about many of these activities. You don't necessarily have to be performing at the professional ballet level to enjoy your activity as well as make it physical exercise for you through your lifetime. Musicians, obviously, it's more limited to the upper extremity in a lot of cases, but if you watch a drummer, for example, they lose like 2 pounds in sweat from any performance. There's that. You've got circus arts. You've got gymnastics, figure skating, of course, which is my area. And so it's a pretty broad group of individuals, each with their own kind of specific needs.
Very all-encompassing.
Yes.
So as we think about this topic, too, one of the things I like to ask every guest and expert on our podcast is, how did you get involved into your area specialty?
How did I get involved? So my training in residency was in family medicine. So my goal was to be a primary care physician. And part of that, there's a large part of that is musculoskeletal. So when I was in residency, I had an opportunity to do a rotation in sports medicine. And having been a dancer myself when I was really young, because my mother was a professional dancer, guess where I ended up at 5? In ballet class with awesome. No natural turnout. And then I ended up on the ice in figure skating, and even to this day continue to work at the Skating Club of Boston with many of the athletes, people that I grew up with skating, and now, of course, I have the opportunity to work with the most elite of our sport, which, is a dream, really, being able to combine your passion, your vocation with your profession.
I just love how you were able to kind of be a pioneer in this field and sort of, be able to combine your two loves, medicine and your athletics. That is inspiring for many kids out there.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
and many of the skaters now are very interested in pursuing medicine and doing things similar to what I do. So I'm trying to bring the next generation up, because I need to retire sometime.
So important. I'm with you on
I know,
that.
right?
That's awesome. So what about cheerleading? Because that's actually a sport that I used to do when I was younger.
Absolutely, and I should have mentioned that in the list. But gymnastics and dance are really a combination that comes together to form cheerleading, because they train in both skills most of the time, and have their own set of unique challenges with injury and such. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember it was not an easy thing to do, but I really enjoyed it.
Not.
And
Yeah.
was always at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Anyways, so knowing your background and how you combined both your love of skating, ice skating, and medicine, sports medicine, what is your daily life like as as a sports medicine physician in this area?
Yeah, it's involves clinical work, patient care in the office, mostly outpatient. I don't really do inpatient medicine anymore. And also involves covering events, things like figure skating. We cover Boston Ballet performances. We do outreach programs for skating clubs, for dance programs. Would love to do it for like cheerleading, because we want to educate as much as possible. I do coverage as team physician for two high schools, two boarding schools here in the area, and as team physician, I'm also the school physician for the boarding students. So I get to reel in my family medicine training.
That's awesome.
as well. And then I travel with U.S. figure skating as well. Wow. So yeah, it's a little busy.
It seems like a really exciting kind of way to practice medicine, though. Right?
It is.
I mean,
it is.
You get to kind of have so many different experiences and have such an impact, which is great. Let's dive into the topic now. What's the difference between a performing artistic athlete and then maybe what we think of as a traditional sports athlete?
Everybody's an athlete, and then how you use that athletic skill in your either sport or performing art or artistic endeavor, it's all requires strength, stability, flexibility, but in the artistic realm, it requires a lot more refined movement, especially subtle movement. Stability is even more important than it is for most other sports, because you're moving like gesture arms and legs to create a mood or an emotion or interpret the music. And so you need to have that stability, because if you start throwing your arms or legs around, you don't want to fall over.
That would be bad.
It's bad. Yes, it's bad. And then I think the frequency of repetition that is required, the training, it has to be very detailed from the get-go. As young dancers or skaters, you have to get those foundational skills established, and it takes many years to build upon that. Not that it doesn't take a lot of years to train in other sports, but they're almost constantly working on this in a very detailed fashion. And that can come with, sense of perfectionism and stressors, to perform and be chosen for pieces, or, results of competitions that now exist in all of these disciplines. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like
so it has another layer, kind of. Yeah.
Like a pressure layer that may be a
pressure
little
layer.
unique. Yeah.
And I always think of it as kind of a nuance of how they perform or what they're doing, and that involves more performance. Because, a football athlete can grunt and yell and grimace, but you can't do that as a performing artist. You have to look like you're having the best time of your life, and this is so easy.
That's so true. I remember, as my daughter started doing Bollywood dancing, her teachers were like, smile, smile.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
she's so focused on the movement that, she wasn't even thinking about smiling at that moment.
Right. And that takes
hard.
a lot of training to get so comfortable and have it be so second nature, your work and performance, to be able to generate that emotion and to smile and the enthusiasm for it. And that's what draws in the audience, which I think makes it particularly special. Well,
thinking about that, then, are there unique challenges for, performing artistic athletes?
Sure. I think, as you pointed out at the beginning, we're not always considered an athletic activity, when in fact it is very physical and very demanding. And there's a lot of competition. Not that there isn't in other sports, but just to get chosen to participate in a summer program, for example, can be highly competitive. And there's this very intense culture around many of these sports that perfectionism is the only thing that's acceptable. And so the kids get in their head to be very perfectionistic, not that they don't in school, but then it adds to it. And so it becomes very stressful for them. And it takes a lot of training, I think, to learn how to manage that mentally. Wow. Which is why things like mental skills coaches can be helpful. You know, how do you calm your nerves when you're performing? How do you feel good about what you're doing and find success and contentment in what you're performing? Because not everybody's going to be the champion or the prima ballerina, but you can still get a tremendous amount of enjoyment.
There's that performing piece that maybe, I mean, you know, all athletes are performing at some level and individuals are watching and audiences are watching, but when you're like on the stage as
when you're
artist and an athlete, that's a different level of you know,
the expectation is different.
Yeah.
The expectation is different. I think they expect the complicated movement, but don't really understand what it takes to do that. But what they're really the audience is really looking for is that emotion and creating a feeling and drawing that audience member in to be able to experience what they're experiencing. So it's another level of production, so to speak.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like, I'm just wondering, like, thinking about my daughter as, like, I'm like looking through her eyes now differently of what she's been doing, seeing her in her practices and how she had, you know, she was trying to follow these same movements and refine it, but yet she had her own little bit of individualistic approach that made her unique. So I imagine that this has also got a little bit of that, like, individualism combined with trying to master the form that you're trying to do.
Right. And I think that's part of what makes it so amazing is because everybody can have those basic fundamental elements, certain turns, certain jumps, certain arm movements. But when you incorporate that to music or to express a particular emotion or feeling, that's another sort of your own individual spin on it to present.
Which is really kind of neat. So thinking about the art combined with athleticism, are there any other unique challenges that, you know, this population of athletes has to deal with?
Absolutely. I think when they have to audition for a program or a part in a performance, what they do at that moment, even if they've been well trained, it's once and done. They have no other chance to do it again. Whereas, if you mess up, you fumble the football, you get another chance in the next play.
Yeah.
But and in we always say for the Olympics, for the skaters, it's you've got 4 minutes to prove 18 years worth of work. And sometimes it goes beautifully, and other times it just implodes, and everything in between. So the pressure is quite great, and they have to train to prepare for that, to be able to perform under almost any circumstance, so that they can have the best chance to be successful. And the same thing in gymnastics, right? The bar routine, for example, is where everybody focuses, and you lose your balance for a fraction of a second, there goes the medal.
Yeah.
It's quite different. You don't get that extra chance.
Yeah, I think about how nervous I am just watching the Olympics. I can't imagine being the athlete there, also knowing that everyone is watching and going to, really critique that and how much of an impact that performance is for each.
And I think in order for them to feel like they're as best prepared for that, the constant repetition and the pushing through, well, I can't take a break even though my foot's killing me because I have to be able to make sure I do enough practice to be well prepared. And it's a struggle sometimes to convince these skaters or dancers that, hey, you know what? You have to be well and healthy in order to do this properly.
To do it well, yeah. Well, thinking about that mental health piece, I mean, that probably is such a big component. Someone like Simone Biles, who's really sort of helped to bring awareness that, this is an important part of their ability to even do their sport, right? I mean, you have to have mental health. So can you tell me more about like how important mental health is and how we can support
very,
our
very
athletes?
important. And I admire what Simone did because, she sort of challenged the norm, the culture of no, don't speak about it. And I think having that resource established before they get into crisis, which is why that comprehensive comprehensive care with mental skills providers, with mental health providers, to be able to coach them through scenarios when the pressure isn't, do or die. And they train themselves how to be able to do that. The mental component of this is huge. We often feel like these performing arts are at least 80% mental and 20% physical preparedness in the performance aspect. Yeah,
that makes sense.
You've got to have that physical foundation. Yeah. But in the performance realm, it's mostly mental.
Yeah, so it's just if not just as important, if not more important. And like you said, Simone Biles as an example, like because she took the time and the care she needed to get the mental health care she needed,
right,
she was able to bounce back and then just exceed
everything. And so it's a beautiful example of, for young gymnasts, young skaters to go, well, she was able to do it, then maybe I should do that too.
Wow.
And getting the culture of programs like ballet schools, like skating clubs or skating organizations to recognize that. I'm very pleased that U.S. Figure Skating has, for the Team USA athletes, a whole group of support, trainers, physical therapists, and mental skills coaching, counseling that they get regularly, nutrition that they get regularly to sort of keep them on track. And that's just so necessary. And what I would love to see in my future is for the lower levels to start that when they're just beginning skating, so it becomes just part of what they do, and then becomes part of what life is, right? The balance.
Yes. So the balance that we're all seeking.
Yep, exactly.
Feels like all of these things that we're talking about that are so critical to an artist athlete are actually things that we all need to be attuned to as parents for all of our kids.
100%, yeah.
And that's tough. So what happens if they don't take good care of their mental health?
Well, I think they ultimately will suffer. They can get depressed. They can develop anxiety about their training, about their performances. And some of them may just be, even with everything available, maybe too fearful or intimidated by the coach, or sometimes parents, who don't believe that needs to be part of this. So I think the more normative or more normal we can make this, that it's just part of the process, then it doesn't become a stigma.
And along those lines too, what about body image?
Oh yeah, and that can definitely fall into the mix as well, because if, again, they're not performing well because they're anxious, and then they think, well, I just have to then be skinnier than the next girl, and then I'll be fine, and it just gets all wrapped into it. And it's a really tough hole to dig yourself out of. Some of these athletes just really struggle, and it's a shame to watch, and in so many cases unnecessary.
Yes.
Because much of it is triggered by the environment.
And a lot of complexity, right? There's a lot of complex pressures going on for the athletes in this situation. That's I can't even imagine. So important to give good comprehensive care that addresses all of these angles. You mentioned nutrition too, because I can imagine there's a lot of pressure on particularly this population of athletes in terms of how to, maintain the body form that they need to do their sport well. So is that something else that, you see a lot of in your patients?
All the time. We often refer to it as the aesthetic of the sport or the art. And in dance, the sylph, very lean, almost feather light appearance is what was preferred. But then you have somebody like Misty Copeland come along, who's just very athletic and strong. And so hopefully as the culture and society kind of accepts this more universally, that that's considered normal. And the same in the skating world. Everybody thinks you have to be really skinny in order to rotate fast enough, but it takes strength too.
So
it's not
strength
just about,
is really
everybody focuses on the size, but they forget about the strength.
See, I'm all for that, let me tell you.
It doesn't matter the package.
Mighty, exactly. No matter, lots of ways to be mighty.
Yep, exactly.
I love that. It's really about strength and, like you said, stability really being those key features.
Right, and making sure they understand that it's not just about the body image, the aesthetic appearance. And I think that will chip away at the prevalence of eating disorders and what we call now relative energy deficiency in sport.
What is that? That's something I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, many times athletes come in and they don't realize that they're deficient in energy, that they're not taking in enough. You know, they're very busy. They have classes back to back in school, and then they go to training, and they don't eat. And so they get, 300-400 calories behind each day and more. And then they end up with difficulty. If the bone density falls a little bit, stress fractures, they lose their menstrual cycle, which of course can affect just many aspects of
their
of
health. Yeah,
long term.
And it sounds like it's so easy for that to just kind of slide into.
It can slide in there very easily, and then of course there's those that are just so focused and with a dysmorphic body image. They don't understand. They don't like their body, and so then they're always making adjustments in terms of restricting calories or avoiding carbs. Hopefully that's changing.
Yes, exactly. Because health is what matters, and that's going to make you a better athlete. And health on all fronts, mental, physical.
I mean, I always refer to it, fairly simplistically. If you've got a fancy sports car, like an Italian sports car, if you don't put gas in it, it's not going anywhere. Or if you don't put good gas in it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's the same for a performing artist or an artistic athlete. The body needs the fuel.
Yeah. And you're going to use it well. I mean, because you're going to be working hard. So that makes sense.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about Boston Children's Performing Artist Athlete Program and how you all approach that comprehensive care.
So if an athlete will often present to us first because of an injury or a foot pain or ankle pain or whatever. And as part of that evaluation, especially in female athletes in these aesthetic type sports, we'll often ask, so, what's your diet like? How's your class? How are the teachers? Are they open? How will they respond to your injury? Because many times the kids will say, well, I can't. The teacher won't let me. And I'm like, okay. There's flag number one.
Yeah, exactly.
Flag number one. And then you can offer and say, well, we have things like mental skills training to help you with anxiety or feeling stressed about things, or counseling if there's bullying that goes on, obviously, unfortunately. And so services available for that, dietitians, and I always frame it in such that you've got to have adequate fuel. You're doing class ballet 6 hours a day, or you're skating 5 hours a day, and you're doing training off the ice. You've got to have adequate energy. Let's make sure that everything you're doing is enough, and there's not some other way we could make it better.
Yeah. So that the athlete doesn't have to, or the parent doesn't have to figure it out on their own. They have an expert to help them figure that out.
Right. And sometimes the parents are as surprised as
I bet.
as the kids. And that's why I think, if the more we can do to provide that education and information for parents, because, unless you've been in the sport, like I would show up to a football field and with a kid, and I wouldn't know what to expect necessarily unless I had done all of this work. And it's a similar situation for a lot of parents at the skating rink and in the dance studio. They just, drop them off and pick them up.
Yeah, that sounds like me.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That checks.
Right.
Oh. Yeah, so you mentioned sort of thinking about, mental health support, dietitians. Who else is part of that team for the program?
There's a whole other group. But when you get to the physicality and the athlete preparation or athlete development, we have physical therapists who specialize in certain areas. We have several dance physical therapists. Two of our physical therapists worked with Boston Ballet for over 20 years.
Oh, neat.
So they're used to the environment and understand. And again, that's a comfort and a reassurance, I think, to both parents and the athletes. And we have trainers. We have a gym, actually in the Skating Club of Boston. One of our McKaylee centers is in the Skating Club of Boston, and we have services there where they can come in and train. And so I can then go to the person training them and go, okay, they need to work on this, this, and this. And then we come up together with a program that's going to help them because they're struggling with this jump or that particular skill.
Wow, that's really cool. Are there other physician groups or diagnostic, parts of the program?
Yeah. So there's several of us that focus a lot on the dance and performing arts, but there are others that do more ultrasound, diagnostic ultrasound, bedside ultrasound. So we can get a lot more diagnostic information, even functional information from the ultrasound with an ankle sprain, say. How loose is that ankle? And do we need to think about a different form of treatment? And there are different injections that can be used. So, yeah, there's lots of tools. And, of course, we have the support of children's radiology, which is amazing. The musculoskeletal radiologists are fantastic. I can call anybody and go, okay, here's what I got. What do I do?
That's
or
amazing.
I ordered this. What do you see?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's fantastic. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So it's really, truly a team sport. You mentioned something about how most of the patients come in when they've had an injury. Mm-hmm. So if you had your, sort of ideal recommendation
My ideal
for parents,
druthers, yeah.
What would you recommend to maybe parents who are listening who have a child in a performing athletic activity? Mm-hmm. When should they seek a comprehensive program like ours?
Yeah, we have the McKaylee Center, and we do what we call injury prevention evaluations, where we take the athlete through very specific measures of flexibility, strength, focused on knowing what their sport is. We have dance screenings specific for dancers. I'm hoping to get going a program where we do that for skaters as well, and hopefully even study that. So I almost feel like at the get-go, as soon as they start, as soon as you get started, because, when they grow and they're developing at the same time, they don't have that foundation just innately, right? You have to develop that. And I think what happens in all sports is they start out at very young and they start learning skills, and that's great, except the body's going to compensate to figure out how to get it done, and they don't understand that. They're just trying to get it done. They're doing what the instructor is telling them. And so then the body gets in a habit, and then that habit can sometimes lead to imbalance, or will lead to imbalance and then injury.
Could be a bad habit, like in terms of the body.
Habit. Yeah, it's just a technique. And something even as simple as running requires, identifying, your glutes and making sure that you're using those.
Yeah.
And nobody ever thinks of that. And,
so true.
Especially the programs are so busy and the kids are so busy. It's like, well, I got to get to the sport. But doing a lot of sports does not automatically make you a well-trained athlete.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't have some kind of deficit or imbalance that needs to be addressed.
Wow.
And it's a constant process of correction.
Yeah. So sort of like seeking help from a comprehensive team, like, a sports medicine team can really help make sure that you're not missing an opportunity to build strength or stability to help them prevent injury.
Yes. And many times it can be, certain skills that they practice. One of my colleagues, when he does the injury prevention evaluation, he's like, first we want to make sure you're moving well as a human, and then we want to make sure you're moving well as an athlete human.
Wow.
So it's kind of almost two steps.
Well, I just need to start working on how I move as a human, and then for everybody else, move on to the human athlete.
Most definitely.
In general, for parents to be aware of, what are some of the things that they can be doing, on a daily basis to help prevent injuries for their artist athletes?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think just making sure they understand from the beginning of starting sport that things like a good warm-up, then cooling down, doing your stretching afterwards when your muscles are nice and warm, and taking the time and incorporating that into a program at the young age, because then they're in a habit, and then when that growth spurt comes, now sometimes it's more gradual, as you know, but sometimes it's, I've had skaters grow 6 inches in a year, that just throws everything off.
Yeah, so building good habits, sounds like.
Building good habits, because then, then I'm trying to convince a 13-year-old that they have to do stretching and strength training, and they look at me like, what?
Yeah, that's a hard age to start.
But if they've been doing it all along and it's just part of the routine, and I think that's the emphasis. I think, as I said before, everybody thinks that just playing sports will give you all of those things, and it just won't.
Yeah.
And, if the program is talking about offering it, or I always encourage parents to say to the coaches, hey, can we get someone in to teach them how to stretch or teach them how to warm up, and what exercises should they do to make them run faster, and those types of things. So then the coaches learn at the same time, because many of them at that level are just volunteers out of the kindness of their heart and time. So I think if they can have that information, and it's not something that they would necessarily think about.
Yeah, because just because you're a coach doesn't mean you're necessarily going to know all these
exactly.
other things.
You may have some things that were taught to you as an athlete, but then, can you remember it? And I always tell parents, look, even if you can do once every couple of months, just get something. Ask for a consultation with a trainer, or there's numerous programs aside from us at the McKaylee Center that offer these services, and they'll design a program. Okay, here's your exercises. All right, come back in 3 or 4 weeks and work on them again. But I think starting at that youngest age, when they're first beginning, a lot of people are like, really? It's kind of overkill. But, if they have any interest in pursuing this long term, you're going to save yourself a lot of inconvenience and trouble later.
Makes sense.
I can't promise. You can never promise that it's not going to happen at all, but hopefully it's less likely and less severe when it does happen.
So prevention early, right?
Yeah.
And really thinking about that as you're starting these sports.
100%.
It's really important. So thinking about when the bad happens, about injuries, what are the types of injuries that you unfortunately see or conditions for?
Yeah, a lot of them overuse in both dance and skating, gymnastics, because of the frequency of repetition, and they start working on something and they have to do it a bunch of times to get better at it, and then they just keep doing it and doing it. You have to think about what their role is within this. We talk a lot about females in the aesthetic sports, but there are also the boys, especially in, dance, in skating, in cheerleading, and they're often bearing the lifting capacity or the expectation of the grand jumps. That's what everybody watches for in the men's variations in ballet, the huge jumps and the incredible strength. So they may require something just a little different than what the girls are doing, depending on what their discipline is.
And their role.
And their role, For the pairs at our rink, they all come in to train, and we talk about, okay, what's the lift like? How do you have to move? Where is she? And they do it on the floor, and we help correct them in terms of stability and give them exercises to build their strength. So
really tailoring that.
You have to tailor it individually based on, what that athlete is doing.
That's great.
And keep in mind the differences that they'll all perform. And musicians, everything is upper body, right? But they still need a strong core.
Yeah.
To hold themselves correctly. Otherwise, their neck and back hurt. So you just really have to think about how that works biomechanically in terms of what the body's required to do. And then just figure out a program to support that.
And to help prevent those overuse.
And help prevent those overuse injuries,
Are there other injuries that you see commonly in your practice?
Definitely. In skating, in pairs especially, boys are throwing girls. Falls happen,
scary.
head injuries. In synchronized skating, we have 16 skaters out there at the same time.
Oh, my goodness.
Shoulder to shoulder apart with sharp blades on their feet. As I always say, what could go wrong?
Yeah, that sounds pretty dangerous to me.
I'll find out this weekend, actually. No, I've seen it a lot. So, yes, there's definitely the cadre of acute injuries, traumatic injuries from falls. We don't tend to see a lot of ACLs on the ice because the surface isn't as stable as, say, the ground. Although it does happen.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about for other sports too? Like you mentioned, cheerleading or dancing. Any specifics that you see there?
Yeah, in say Irish step, it's a lot of foot and ankle. Right, they don't do a great job at stretching properly, and so then they get into those compensatory patterns and overuse. And once one muscle's taking over, then other muscles that should be helping can't. So again, it's finding that improvement. Falls from apparatus in the gym, gymnastics, bodies from stacking, and stunting in cheerleading happens all the time. Kind of thing.
So injuries, it's not for the faint of heart, maybe,
when
it comes to the performing athletes. There's a lot of risk,
It
too.
is. There's a lot of work,
Yeah.
And again, just, they look so easy and light and carefree, but what goes into that, creating that,
the amount of
is
practice
amazing.
and work. Yeah.
Oh,
I have new respect.
New respect, yes.
So you mentioned head injuries. So, specifically concussions, are they very common for this population?
They are, even in dance. Actually, one of my colleagues did a study at Boston Conservatory, and especially with the contemporary modern styles, because of, unusual rolling and drops, there are quite a few injuries.
Lots of different ways head injuries can happen.
Lots of different ways. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of easy to see, in gymnastics, okay, you fall off the bars, or, the boys fall off the rings or something. But even in dance, collisions happen when people are in the wrong spot, blinded by the spotlights.
Oh, the lights. Yeah, I didn't think about that because you're performing.
Yep.
Yeah, and then can be blinding.
Snow in Nutcracker, where they're dripping down pieces of paper. That's what the snow is, paper confetti.
Oh.
Point shoes and paper confetti do not get along well.
I bet it's very slippery.
Oh, it's very slippery, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So you even, and I would imagine skating, too. Like, I can't imagine ice skating. Because now you're accelerating your movement, and then if you have an injury...
Right.
That must be very
right.
Very
so
scary.
Especially at the very elite level, those high level teams, they'll be skating at, probably 20 miles an hour. And then he takes the girl, throws her, she doesn't land the jump, falls, and slides right into the boards.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And that happens all the time. Wow. So yeah, the potential there is quite significant. Big. Yeah.
So back to injury prevention.
Back to injury prevention, yeah.
We want to avoid that for our kids, so I like that.
Right.
Well, thinking about this, one of my favorite topics to think about, what's on the horizon from a research perspective or an innovation to help our kids?
The first thing you often look at to decide how to help a population is, okay, what's happening? So assessing the injuries. Dance is way ahead of figure skating, is very far behind because it's hard to do. We're very spread out. We don't have a group like a ballet company where you've got 100 people all in one building. So that takes a little bit more work.
From a research perspective.
Yeah. And then I think the first goal is identifying the injuries and then trying to figure out, well, why is that happening? Is it because of these compensation patterns they develop?
Yeah.
Do they not have the basics of the strength or stability that's needed? And if they don't, how do we get it for them without spending an exorbitant amount of more time on the ice that's very expensive?
Yeah.
It costs quite a lot. So you have to take all of those things into account. But I think there's more and more people interested in that and starting to look at it. Like I said, dance, I think, is further ahead of us. There's a whole organization, the International Association of Dance Medicine and Science, which has a journal. And people do biomechanical studies. They do mental health studies, all kinds of things. There's a conference every year. And so there's a lot of discussion and finally, I think, an identification that, hey, these kids need help.
If you think about football, you hear a lot about the research that's being done in terms of injuries, what it means for kids that are adults, and then also how to prevent it. But you don't really hear about this as much, at least in my experience, for the artistic athletes. But yet, as we're learning now, it's so important, and there's injury is so possible. So, studying this seems like it needs to be a high priority.
It needs to be a high priority. Yeah. And I think football back in it was like early 90s, I think, when they first started to identify like the concussive relationship and that kind of thing. So that's not all that long ago when you think about it in terms of research and gathering a database, if you will. And I think there's more and more that's happening in other sports like soccer, high school sports, professional sports, because there's a lot of money riding on it.
Yeah.
Whereas in performing arts, dancers don't get paid a fraction of what other sports do. So you got to find somebody to fund it. And so it has its own set of challenges. And skating the same way.
Yeah. But it's so important.
It's so important.
As we wrap up, one of the things I always like to ask, is there anything that we haven't talked about that, you want our audience to know?
Yeah. Well, what I should have mentioned when we talk about the research, I think the whole point of doing that in any sport, and especially for the artistic sports, is that we want to identify the areas that we could improve with injury prevention programs, exercise programs, figuring out why that is happening in terms of, is it something about the technique of how they teach it? Is there a better way to do it that's more efficient biomechanically, and those types of things, which then gets into back to that, quality human movement and quality athletic movement. And I think that needs to be more of the focus all across the board for sports, honestly, to look at that as a foundation of development.
That's really important. I mean, because ultimately our kids' health and lives depend on it.
100%.
It's just so important.
The other thing that we need to keep in mind is we're learning skills now at a young adolescent age that hopefully will carry forward through life.
I'm thinking there's probably, from a performing, artistic, athletics competition perspective, there may be an endpoint, right? That you maybe can only do it then for just fun and exercise. So how do you counsel families from that perspective?
Yeah, you got to have a plan B. And I'm like, yes, we do have a plan B. Because you can have the most illustrious performance career and, be world famous, but that's going to end at some point, right? Physically, it has to.
Yeah.
And that's true in sports as well. And very often when they get so caught up in this as their entire identity, it becomes a very difficult transition, and not everybody navigates it successfully. So I think we have a responsibility in sports medicine to say, hey, you know what, this is about sport, yes, but it's about all of life, and not just about their sport, but how their sport integrates into the rest of their life. Do they want to coach because they love coaching? Do they want to just skate for fun? Do they want to, do something else with it or go off to a different kind of program?
Because we all need a plan B.
I think, too, what puts a lot of that pressure and that perfectionism is, oh, man, if I don't succeed at this, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Well, there's 50,000 other things you can do.
Yeah.
And so if they have a plan or an idea of how that's going to integrate into their training, then I think it becomes less of a disaster if something doesn't happen, because there is such a competitive area, and it's less than 0.2% that actually make it to that very elite level.
Wow.
So most of us are just, going through it because we love it.
Well, exactly.
And I think that as a parent, that feels good too, to make sure that your kid is getting to do what they love to do, but they also have another thing that they can transition to.
Yeah, sort of like for that longevity. And
And
preparing for that probably helps to make it less stressful or, difficult as things change as we get older.
Right, exactly.
Well, now on to doctor's orders. And so this is a part of the show where we prescribe an action that our parents can take to help raise healthy, happy kids. So I was just wondering if you could share with our audience what your doctor's orders are.
Yeah, I think my order or recommendation would be to ask a lot of questions. Ask the instructors, ask the coaches, how are you navigating this? What do you do for the basics? What other opportunities do they have for training? And if they don't have answers for that, then you probably need to think carefully about where you have them, but also ask your kids. Make sure that they are having that experience that you want them to have, because of the culture, it may not even be intentional, but a kid will take something home that it's not what it was intended, but they're impressionable and young and they don't have a reference point. So making sure that they understand that it's about their experience as opposed to necessarily success outcome kind of thing. I get kind of frustrated sometimes because coaches often, it's about winning. It's not necessarily, right? Yeah. Winning, I always say, if nobody gets hurt, that's a great game. And if we win, that's frosting.
I like that. Yep. It's all about playing the game.
It's about playing the game and participating. And they've actually done studies that kids would rather sit on the bench of a losing team and participate than sit on the bench and not be able to participate in a winning team.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, I think that is good advice for all parents, because, just asking questions, checking in with our kids is so important, in all aspects of life. And it sounds like in performing athletics, it's just even more important because of all the pressure. Thank you so much, Dr. Geminiani, for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank Thank you so much for listening to Boston Children's Answers Parentcast, and a special thanks to our guest parent, Teresa, and our guest expert, Dr. Ellen Geminiani. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, and for other topics, please check us out at bostonchildrens.org.